This is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and that's me, the host, Kenneth Arthur. And every week on Seaside Chats, I sit down with a person and talk about their fandom of the NFL or sports, and we talk about growing up. Usually this person is a fan of the team that the Seahawks are playing that week, and usually, this is a person that is a comedian, improviser, writer, maybe just a person of note. And this week, no exception, as we have comedian, improviser, and writer Nick Wiger, and in my opinion, a person of note, host of the Doughboys podcast, writer on shows such as At Midnight, Comedy Bang Bang, Party Over Here. He's here with us today to talk about growing up in the Los Angeles area. Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
A pleasure to be here, Kenneth.
Yeah, it's.
I didn't realize this was such a backdoor way for you to talk about the Seahawks. That's a great gimmick you've engineered for yourself.
Thank you. Some of my readers, because this is a show that's been not me having a podcast about the Seahawks has been going on for 3 years, but
right.
This format of me bringing in a comedian to talk about their team is something that's new this season, and some of my listeners are already very upset about it and don't see it as a way to talk about the Seahawks.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, adapt or die, Kenneth.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to help people maybe see the exploration and evolution of something, and maybe,
sure.
And we're figuring it out.
Right.
And I know, what I'm happy about is that the guests are happy, because a lot of people in comedy, or they'll be asked on podcasts to talk about comedy or something like that, never about their team. So hopefully they are all been very happy to be able to talk about sports freely on a podcast.
Right. Well, I think if you're, and I appreciate that, I do think if your fans are a little maybe skeptical of this format change, they're going to be particularly skeptical about my contributions, because I'm someone who stopped following the NFL a few seasons ago because I just couldn't enjoy it anymore because of CTE. And so I'm not going to have any relevant insights on the current state of the game. I don't really know who's in the league anymore. I don't, I just have peripheral knowledge of what's going on just from stuff that ekes out into sports media in general. But I don't follow the NFL week to week or game to game or team by team at all anymore.
See, but I mean, yeah, and I hear that, and I hear what I'm hearing is, oh, this is a fan or a former fan who has a popular opinion, especially now in today's NFL, about people tuning out the NFL for various reasons.
Right.
So to me, I see something extremely valuable to have conversations like this. And to some, I'll read you a comment on my last podcast episode with Luka Jones. He came in and he talked about the Rams, but he also talked about how he chooses his favorite sports teams based on the city he's living in. So when he moved to Los Angeles, he dropped the Broncos, he dropped the Nuggets, and he immediately became a fan. Well, he was the Broncos until 2016, and at that point, he immediately picked up the Rams. Some people very upset about this.
Wait, so he got a Super Bowl and then moved on to a new team?
Yes.
Is that how it? Okay, so he got to enjoy that championship,
yes,
and then moved on to a new franchise that had just arrived in town. Yeah, that's convenient. I don't know. I'm not sure if I approve of that. But it's easy for me to say because I'm a lifelong Southern Californian. I've lived here my whole life, which is me repeating the exact same thing I just said in different words. And so, but I was a fan of my big team was as a kid. My biggest team was as a kid, the Lakers. Obviously, I mean, it was pretty much the only game in town. I mean, even though the Clippers were here, that was a fucking joke. No one rooted for the Clippers when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. And the Rams were my other team. I was an LA Rams fan. And then they moved off in the early 90s. They moved to St. Louis, at which point my NFL fandom became more general, and I didn't have a team for, 20 years. I just was not even rooting. I didn't have a rooting interest in anyone. Was just sort of generally following the league. Baseball and hockey were always kind of things that were I didn't really follow. Kind of loosely followed baseball, never really followed hockey at all. But yeah, I do think that in terms of sports fandom, are you from Washington State? What's your background?
Yeah, I grew up in Bellevue, Washington, which is right outside Seattle.
Right. So to me, that's like, I think the basis for fandom should be something that you established when you started following the sport. And I think it should have to do with when you're like where you live. Like, I honestly feel like proximity to your hometown is the best justification for being a fan of a particular team. Like, the only exception for me is if you maybe don't have a team and then an expansion franchise arrives. Like, all the this is I probably shouldn't go down this avenue with someone from Seattle, because I'm trying to talk about the Supersonics, but it was egregious the way the Sonics move was handled. That was one of the worst things that's happened in the NBA in the time I've been following it. But everyone there who was in Oklahoma, who maybe was previously like following the Mavericks or not following the NBA at all, when the Thunder arrived in town, that's the point where it's just like, okay, now it's cool to jump on this team. I feel like that's 100% appropriate in terms of changing your allegiance. Or I guess the other thing is if you have just a truly wretched ownership. Like, if I was like a Washington football team fan, not the Seahawks, the one in DC, and I just like dealing with Daniel Snyder, like that little shit, just for so long, just like that awful, contemptible man rather. And the same thing with like James Dolan, who owns the Knicks. Like, if I'd just been like a Knicks fan forever, Knicks fans are great. They're insanely loyal to a franchise that has given them so little over the years. But like, if I was like a Knicks fan and had just gotten so frustrated having to deal with fucking Dolan and the Jimmy D and the Sure Shot or whatever his fucking awful Vanity Project blues band is, and I had to deal with that shit for years, and then I finally like moved to LA and was like, you know what, I'll follow a competently run franchise. Like that I can kind of understand. But in general, I think I respect people who remain loyal to their hometowns and hometown teams. And there's most of LA, I feel like, is expats. It's a lot of people from across the country, in my experience. And most of those people who are sports fans tend to be following the team they grew up liking still. Like, they're Cleveland, you'll run into Cleveland Browns fans out here and Eagles fans. Wherever people are from different cities across the country, just fill in the with whatever city you can think of.
Well, I mean, also like with Luka, and this is exactly why I think those conversations are valuable, because
I think this is like I really am enjoying that this is just a dog pile on Luka. That's what my episode is becoming.
Luka's but it's like that's what he deals with every day when he tells people about this. So it's like, but for him, it's about the fact that this is first of all, I think it's an interesting, and I agree with philosophy. It's that he moved here in 1997 and he considers himself an Angelino. Like, this is his home now, so it's like.
So he kind of moved here in childhood then?
No, I don't know exactly how old he moved here after college.
Oh, he moved here after college. Okay.
Yeah. So, from 22 to now 42, he's been in Los Angeles. I've lived here for 9 years and I consider Los Angeles to be my home. I'm still a Seahawks fan, but I'm forever in my heart an Angelino, I think. And people and you as someone who's grown up here, I mean, it's true. When people move here, they almost feel like they have to push away the identity with LA and say like, oh, no, I'm not from here. I'm not from here. I'm not one of the people that's from here. So don't associate me with a person that's from here. And I'm like, well, why not just embrace it? You obviously live here. You always have some reasons for that.
Yeah, my co-host on Doughboys, Mike Mitchell, is from Quincy, Massachusetts. He's very stringent about correcting me that it's Quincy, not Quincy, which is, I guess either a neighborhood in Boston or right next to Boston. But he's such like a cartoonish stereotype of a Bostonian, just the most Bostonian man, the biggest masshole you can think of, and just like is always wearing Patriots hats and Celtics jerseys. And he's lived here for over a decade, but still kind of refuses to acknowledge that he lives in LA, or like still think like, I'm a Boston guy, like that's my hometown. And it is like that is a thing I think people cling to. I think there's a happy medium though, where you acknowledge where you are now and acknowledge how that's the person you are and that's what your identity is, but that you still have some allegiance to your hometown.
Yeah, it's a mix. And I mean, but I think people who are like, well, I moved here just for Hollywood. I moved here just to get an entertainment. It's like, well, can't you include that in what Los Angeles is,
Right.
So that's just that sort of thing. But I'm still always going to be a Seahawks fan. I'll always be a fan of Washington State University. It's always going to be. I mean, I got a tattoo for Washington State University, and I'm not a tattoo guy. But when thinking of like, well, what kind of tattoo could I get? I knew be a Washington State fan, so it works, for me. And but regarding the format change of the podcast, this is a comment that I think sums up maybe a lot of people's feelings right now about the show. So this is on fieldgoals.com, which is the Seahawks website that I run, and I've had a podcast for a long time. But it says, I love your analysis and appreciate your dedication, Kenneth. But the Seaside Chats don't feel like they belong in the Field Goals community to me. There is little to no substantive Seahawks discussion within, and these guys often simply don't know very much about football.
Yeah.
But I like the conversations that we're having, And if people are going to talk about tuning out of the NFL for CTE, that's discussions that I think we should be having.
Well, I think there might be something to, and I don't know I don't know your fandom all that well, but I mean, I think, or well at all, but I think I think there might be something to just like people kind of get their expectations for what something is about. And then if there's a shift in premise or something like that, it's maybe a little bit jarring to a listener. But so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a way that these are side episodes or specially designated episodes or something like that. I don't know. I don't know.
What's the most jarring? What's the moment in Doughboys history? Because it's been a couple years now. What's the most moment in Doughboys history where your fans sort of turned on you the most?
There were a couple of guests where they just kind of took over the episode. They're just very dominant guests. I won't say who they are, but lovely people. And I like them, actually. I like the conversations, but the episodes really veered off in terms of not talking about food at all. And I mean, I don't think we talk about food all that much on our podcast anyway. If anyone isn't aware of what the format is, we review a different chain restaurant each week. So like a Chili's or a Wendy's or a Taco Bell or a TGI Fridays or what have you. And a lot of times the discussion, like on any podcast, veers off on wild tangents, but we've had some where they were just so tangential, or just the guest was so dominant that they ended up being entirely about, just talking about relationships or something. And those were ones where there's a lot of our fans who just like to listen to us talk about whatever, but there's a lot of people who are genuinely like, hey, like I'm someone who is into food, or I'm someone who like eats really healthy now, so this is my outlet to hear people talk about like unhealthy shitty food that I used to enjoy, or I'm a vegan, and this is my way that I get to enjoy that. And so like if you aren't touching on that topic, people can sometimes get a little frustrated.
It is interesting, and I mean, you can relate this to so many other aspects of life where people are a fan of something, and if that something releases another product that goes off of the beaten path for that person, they get very upset rather than just don't have that thing that's off the beaten path.
Right.
Like, I'm sure I'm sure that you have a favorite video game chain franchise that has had versions of it that you do not like playing, right?
Oh boy, I mean, the big disruption was probably Final Fantasy XI going in the MMO direction. That was I think the first Final Fantasy I didn't play, and I've actually heard it was pretty good. And I haven't played 14 either, just because I'm just not really an MMO guy. I've dicked around with World of Warcraft a little bit, but that's about it. And so, yeah, I think that was one big one. Super Mario Brothers 2 way back in the day, that was kind of a bit of, I mean, I think a beloved game in hindsight, but it was a bit of a change from what the first one was, because it was an entirely different game, Doki Doki Panic, that they just reskinned as a Mario stateside. And then also, maybe the bigger one back in the NES days was Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, where they kind of took the overhead gameplay, that perspective of the first one, and then just made that into a world map, and then the combat was actually like side scroller, and that was like a huge disruption. I think a lot of people just like really didn't like that game at all. Also, there was definitely a big shift when games shifted from the 2D era to the 3D era, when we kind of went from the 16-bit era to the 32-bit era. I think was that big dividing line from the SNES, Genesis, TurboGrafx 16 into your PlayStations, your Sega Saturns, and your Nintendo 64s. And that was a bit of a disruption that took some adjustment. I think a lot of those early 3D platformers in particular were pretty bad in hindsight, and it took some doing before they figured it out. But yeah, I mean, like, I think, I think when things just kind of, for me, you can still appreciate them, that someone's like, I think maybe when I was younger, I was a little bit more frustrated when there would be like, oh, I just give me the thing that I want. But now I have a little bit more appreciation for like, oh, I understand why a game designer, why that artist would maybe make that change just to try to challenge themselves. I guess when it's maybe a little bit, I'm trying to think of a great example. Maybe one will come to me in a bit, but I think the place where it sucks is when it's clearly like, oh, this came from a purely uh, economic, like, perspective, where they were like, okay, this franchise will sell more if we kind of go in this direction, and we kind of shift our genres or kind of try to make it more extreme or whatever. Oh, you know what was one is the Prince of Persia sequel. There's Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, and then what was the sequel? It was something like Prince of Persia: Wicked Warrior or something. It was like very like extreme, and they took like this kind of like cool storybook aesthetic from the first one and then shifted it in this like dark, like emo,
Warrior Within.
Yeah, Blood-Soaked Warrior Within. Yeah, that one kind of pissed me off that they did that. It's like, that was what was cool about the first one, was that it was not this, but you tried to make it more like oh, this is like people like GTA. We'll make this like a GTA.
Yeah. I it's interesting, and we'll go back to the beginning. I've heard you say this many times because I've listened to. I mean, first of all, if you're not listening to the Doughboys, it's my favorite podcast. I love it.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you,
it's
Kenneth.
So good. You guys have, even the Mass Hole and the Long Beach Kid. They come together, and you're two of the best hosts out there. So it works really well. So definitely listen to the Doughboys. But I've heard you say this many times on that, and maybe I've heard your interviews on several other podcasts. But where were you born? And can you imagine? Can you remember like your first like favorite sports team and how you got into your sports in the beginning?
Yeah, right. So I grew up in Lakewood, California, which is just outside of Long Beach. I went to middle school and high school in Long Beach, so I have a lot of connection to Long Beach still. And it's about it's about a 45-minute drive from LA in average traffic, so not too far from it, but it's still like LA as a kid felt like the big city. It felt so like far away. I remember driving to Dodgers games. I think this is maybe my first live sports memory, is driving to a Dodgers game and it feeling like an adventure. It just like, it felt like it took forever to get there. It was like going to grandma's house, and my grandma lives 3 hours away. It's a totally different, just a much further distance. But to me, it felt like that we were traversing the same amount of road to get to the Dodger Stadium. And then I don't remember the game at all. It was a night game, and I remember driving there, and I remember being sleepy on the way home. But I think here's what I remember. I remember because I had like a little bulletin board in my childhood bedroom, and I don't even remember how it got there. I mean, my dad might have put it there, but there was an LA Lakers like championship button for one of the championship years in the 80s that was just like hanging up there, like LA Lakers world champions. What would have been like 1986, 87. It was like one of those was just like mounted on my bulletin board. I just remember that always being in my bedroom. And whether it was something that I got and I put up there, or something that my dad just like kind of put up there and was like, here, you're a Lakers fan now. And it just always like kind of put in my head of like, oh, this is my team. These are my guys. And I just always, always thought about them. So that was probably my first real team I was passionate about. Also too, like I just loved basketball. Like I loved playing it on the playground. I loved playing one-on-one, even though I wasn't great. I thought I was good at the time, but in hindsight, I was shitty by, third grader standards. And, and then my abilities never improved. I'm still a shitty third grader in terms of basketball ability.
You play very often?
No, I don't play anymore.
Okay.
But it's I honestly I don't think I've played basketball in probably 10 or 15 years. It's been a while, but I still follow it avidly.
Yeah.
But it's but I always really love the sport, and then just like the personalities in LA, like the team was right there. It was something I could identify with locally, and then like Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Byron Scott, Kareem, like these were all guys that were just like so identifiable. And I felt like just like I just thought just so cool. I was just like, oh, Magic's so
Yeah.
cool, and like again, I thought Kareem's goggles were cool. Kareem and James Worthy had goggles. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like I want goggles like that, uh,
Yeah.
which is like just a weird kid brain thing. But yeah, so I always was really into the Lakers, and I admittedly a very easy team to root for in the 80s, even into the early 90s, up until Magic's early retirement. But the other team that I was a fan of, yeah, I mentioned going to Dodgers games, still didn't really follow baseball, but I was an LA Rams fan. And
Hmm.
again, it can only kind of remember in vague terms, but I remember really liking like Henry Ellard and Flipper Anderson, who were kind of the two
Yeah.
receivers of the Jim Everett era. And I remember being like a big fan of those guys and thinking they were so cool. If I had like a football video game, like oh man, what was the old classic one? Tecmo Bowl. Like I had Tecmo Bowl for the
Yeah.
NES, and I always wanted to be the Rams. And like I think I had like some other a Nintendo video game that like didn't have an NFL license, but they still had a team that was from LA, like the LA Waves or whatever. They'd always have uh, some fake made up team that with kind of near match colors that you could play as, and I would always pick them if I was playing that game. And yeah, so those were kind of my teams that I was really like kind of like avidly following. And honestly, like, I think the first time I remember being crushed by a sporting event was it was one of, I'm not going to get know the exact year, but it was one of the Niners Super Bowl years,
Uh-huh.
and the Rams made it all the way to the NFC Championship game. And I was so excited. I was like, "Oh my God, the Rams are going to play the 49ers. Um, they're going to win. They're going to go to the Super Bowl. They're going to win the Super Bowl." And the Niners just fucking creamed them. It was one of those ones. It was like I think it was 48-3 or something. It was just like an embarrassing blowout. Just absolutely just destroyed them. Just you know Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and Roger Craig just demolishing this team, and then going on to the
Yeah.
Super Bowl and beating the Broncos. I think like 55-10. It was just one of those
Mm.
years where they just were so much better than everyone else. And that was when I remember like watching the game and being crushed, and then just the double insult of the next morning, the newspaper coming and the sports page having like the headline like about the Rams blowout, and just feeling like such a fuck you and just being so pissed off about that. And
Yeah, it
sad
seems.
too.
Yeah, well, the Rams. I'm looking at the box score now. The Rams led 3-0 in the first
Hmm.
quarter, and then
Right.
gave up
Yeah.
21 points
Yeah.
in the second quarter. Lost 30-3. But you could look at those 49ers teams, like you mentioned. Montana.
30-3, that
Even
was the final
backup
score.
was Steve Young. What's that?
30-3, that was the final score.
Yeah.
So it made it worse in my memory, but it was still a blowout.
But still, Roger Craig and Jerry Rice and, some of the, the defense, it was all one of the best teams, which, you're talking
Right.
about the Lakers. I'm looking again back at, you just sort of relive the Lakers franchise, which is so many dominant eras. We're living now in the worst era of Lakers history. But I'm looking at even like you talk about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, his numbers are even more insane than I could remember, which was, 34 points, 16 rebounds, 35 points, 16 rebounds,
Right.
like things that we don't even see today. Whereas, and the Lakers have a lot of these guys, but where does Kareem, rank in your Mount Rushmore of NBA players? Do you have your Mount Rushmore for these guys?
Well, in terms of whether it's Lakers or whether it's NBA players, I mean, he's on the Mount Rushmore no matter what. I mean, he's a top
Uh-huh.
four player of all time. I don't know. I mean, I'd say maybe top three. I
Yeah.
don't know how you go lower than top five. Maybe he's the all-time scoring leader. He was so dominant for this like basically 2 decades.
Yeah.
Was arguably the best player in the league in the 70s and the 80s. Magic Johnson even admittedly like he would just be like, those teams were the Showtime Lakers teams. I got the credit, but those were Kareem's teams.
Yeah.
That's not a direct quote, obviously, but I mean, it was something along those lines. And he was just so good, but also like the kind of, I think maybe his best modern comparison. This isn't exactly 1-to-1 in terms of skill set, but it's kind of the Tim Duncan of his era, in the just sort of like this guy who was maybe uh, less someone who is comfortable in the spotlight and the limelight, and maybe was just like more sort of someone who just was just insanely good at what they do, but had a lower profile among the fans as a result, but just like what had so much success on the court. And certainly if you extend it back to his collegiate days, I mean, he was just insanely dominant.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I mean, Kareem is one of my favorite players of all time. Even though I didn't like, I'm barely old enough to remember watching much of his games live. But also beyond that, it's just like I really like that he's just like kind of this smart, withdrawn man. Like I can kind of relate that he's just like oh, this kind of like weirdo brainy guy who just kind of wants to be left alone and write a book about Sherlock Holmes's brother, you know, and then just like pen these thoughtful editorials about how collegiate athletes should be paid. I'm just like, oh, I really like that guy.
How do you
I like that
grade
he's
his
just a smart, weird man.
How do you grade his comedy chops with Airplane?
He's great in Airplane. That's one of the best athlete performances, right? I mean, what's better than it? I mean,
OJ
honestly,
Simpson, got to be honest.
yeah. If we're having that conversation, OJ was really good in Naked Gun, but
Yeah.
Yeah, Kareem's awesome in Airplane. The way he just sort of plays that pilot so neutral, and then he has that turn, that aggressive turn when we kind of get the reveal that he is the real Kareem. And he just like lays into that kid. Yeah, I think I mean, he was great.
NBA players do seem to, more so than any other sport, venture into TV and film more than others, and maybe it's because they're so much more visible on the court. I mean,
it's got to be that, right?
LeBron James. How did you feel about LeBron James and Trainwrecked?
LeBron was great. I thought he was very fine. I mean, I really like LeBron and Trainwreck. We saw I thought Kobe's scene. They released that one scene for the Jalen Rose pilot, and I thought he was really good in that. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely like, I feel like you probably, if you're a pro athlete, you probably give so many, especially if you're an NBA player and you're just on camera so much, you probably have so much time just speaking in front of an audience.
Yeah.
That you're just kind of comfortable as a performer. And maybe some guys are going to have more natural charisma than other guys. But if you're playing kind of like a version of yourself and you can just be comfortable as yourself, and you can just be loose, I think you can definitely, I think definitely a lot of these guys have the skills to give funny performances.
Did you feel,
I like LeBron and Trainwreck.
Did you feel then that, like, I mean, it's something that you hear a lot if you're someone who does practice or train or do improv, which do you feel like it's just so much of it is just having the confidence to go out there and not be afraid to be yourself or make choices? Like, it's just having that confidence.
Right. I mean, that's like most of it, right?
Yeah.
If you seem tentative or uncertain, the audience is going to be uncomfortable, and if the audience is uncomfortable, then they're less prone to laugh. I mean, if we're just sort of doing a very basic breakdown of what makes an audience, you know, enjoy a show or enjoy a performance. So yeah, I think confidence is a huge part of it.
So there's the Lakers, and then there's the Rams, and we talked about them moving and coming back. Let's talk about just how your football fandom. At what point were you sort of coming back into it, and then at what point did you decide I can't support this league anymore?
Well, I was just sort of I was following. So after the Rams left, was it 94? Do you know the exact year?
Yeah, 94.
94. Okay. So the Rams and the Raiders, and I wasn't a Raiders fan, but I did watch their games, and I did like Bo Jackson and Marcus Allen. When those teams left in the same year, that was kind of the point where I was just like, well, fuck it, like whatever. And I think I was kind of apathetic about the NFL, but then when the season started again, I was still like, you know what? I still like this game. And so I became just like sort of a general follower. Weirdly, I think there was a period where I was just kind of like, I was just like, okay, you know what? I'll just root for the AFC, which is weird to just be like, my team is a conference. But I think, there was that run where the NFC was just so dominant in the Super Bowl. It was kind of like how the Western Conference is so much better than the Eastern Conference in the NBA right now. And so I just kind of felt like I was collectively rooting for the underdog by rooting for the AFC and hoping the AFC would win the Super Bowl. So that actually, I think that put me in the run of it put me somewhere in the run of those 4 straight Bills losses where I was rooting for the Bills every year, and that they just they kept losing the Super Bowl. But yeah, so I just generally followed the league, and then as all the CTE stuff started coming out, I don't remember the exact season, but it was probably maybe 2 seasons ago, 3 seasons ago even, where I just stopped watching the league entirely. I was definitely following it as recently as the 2011-2012 season. And then yeah, I just started getting like, when I saw more and more of this, when I'd see someone, and a lot of people have made these similar sort of testimonials, but when I'd like watch someone take a hard hit, or stand up off the field and be staggering, or be carted away, I was just like, man, this is just so brutal. And then when I think honestly the Junior Seau suicide was a big thing for me, where I was just like, man, this is just, I mean, that he had about as much success in the league as you could, and he seemed to have a good life off the field. And obviously, like, he didn't do anything as horrific as Chris Benoit did as he before he killed himself. But it was similar in terms of, like, you looked at Chris Benoit and you're just sort of like, well, this guy, he seemed like everything was working out for him. But just clearly his brain was just broken. And that's not to give him, to excuse what he did, or say he doesn't have any culpability for his crimes. But I mean, looking at Junior Seau, and I was just like, man, this guy seemed to have everything going on for him. I remember just like I was aware, because the Chargers were the closest team, even though I was never a Chargers fan. I was just like kind of like aware of the arc of his career, and always kind of like had a soft spot for him. And then he just like fucking shot himself and made sure to preserve his brain so they could study it. I was like, Jesus, he knew that something was wrong with him, but he didn't know how to deal with it. And that came from him playing professional football. And I just was like, I've just been so, I just couldn't enjoy it. I just was like, and I thought about like, okay, well, what would have to everything, when I'd read articles about what rules would have to change, and how could they make the game actually safe enough to play, it seemed like the consensus was there's no real solution. Like, they'd have to do things like, it would have to be a pro flag football league, or it would have to be there's no kickoffs, there's no punts. Maybe linemen can't use their hands during blocking or during a pass rush. And it's just like, well, that's just a different game than what people are watching, and that's not the NFL. And I also just realized, I also too just generally thought of what a shitty league it is. Like, I think like Roger Goodell is just such a horrific commissioner. He just is such an idiot. And I think so many of the owners are just like awful men. Like, most sports owners and most billionaires are bad people, but the NFL owners seem to be particularly like arch conservative, just capitalist assholes. I hate that aspect of it too. And it's not perfect in the NBA, but I feel like, it's a more progressive league, and I feel like I like Adam Silver as a steward of the league. I like his leadership a lot better than I do Goodell's, and I think and also too, it doesn't feel like the game is killing the players. It doesn't feel like post-retirement, players are mentally or physically crippled, and former stars are now shells of the men that they once were.
Well, let me. I got a few things to say in regards to what you just said. Number one, I agree that I think the NBA is the best league in America right now. I think that
when I say that, and I'll let you finish your thought, but I just want to interject because sometimes people will be like, I'll sort of make that observation, and people will be like, I hate basketball or like hockey's better or whatever. It's just like, I'm not saying in terms of it's the best sport. Like that's
right.
a subjective thing, but I think you can kind of look at it from a perspective of which league has the best administration, which league
Yeah.
is the best business, not in terms of revenue, but in terms of like, like just like it's the most humanely run, and the most effectively run. And I think it has to be the NBA, regardless of what your sports
Yeah.
fandom is. I get people who don't like basketball or think it's boring or whatever. That's just a taste thing. But go on, finish your point.
Yeah, no. I mean, I personally, like you mentioned before, the Sonics left and they were stolen, and from that point forward, I stopped paying attention to the NBA.
Right.
I'm trying again now recently because I actually do like basketball. But
they should just move a team back to Seattle.
We would love it.
What are the Pelicans doing? Like, no, New Orleans doesn't care about that team. Bring Anthony Davis to town.
That would be amazing. But even not really caring about the sport and feeling betrayed by it. I mean, I feel betrayed by David, what's his face. I actually think that the NBA is doing the best job of running and promoting their sport right now. Every time even Adam Silver coming in after I left paying attention to basketball, every time he's in the news, I like what he's saying. And I wish that the NFL was more flexible with how they would do things to appease the fans, or to not just appease the fans, because you can't always do that. That would be insane. But like to do things that would obviously make the sport better, and they're not doing those types of things in the NFL. And I don't, like Roger Goodell, and I do agree that the owners, for the most part, I think Seattle is very lucky to have one of the best owners in the NFL, if not in the top 5 with Paul Allen, because he is. For one, he's a much bigger basketball fan than he is a football fan, and he loves his Trailblazers. And I think with the Seahawks, he's more of a hands-off guy, and that's why he hired Pete Carroll to run the show, because he trusts Pete Carroll to run the show, and Pete Carroll needed a job where he was going to run the show. But I think, and I don't want to. I realize I've never really said this yet out loud, and I feel like it could be controversial to some people listening. I think that the issues with CTE are and concussion, while needs to be, cannot be ignored, I think do get overblown by the fact that anecdotally we do have these stories about Junior Seau, or about Javon Belcher, who the Kansas City Chiefs player who killed his girlfriend and then killed himself at the Chiefs facility. And I do think it's anecdotal, and I do think like those people, like Junior Seau is certainly not the first celebrity to kill himself, and we have had plenty of people in music and movies and yada 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 who never had CTE kill themselves and seemingly had it all. I'll say that studies have shown that NFL players live longer on average than the average person. And a study from the CDC's National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has a database of 3,439 NFL players who played at least 5 seasons in the league from 1958 to 1998, and only 12 suicide deaths were found. And they estimated that about more than double that, 25.6, would be expected to be found in a database of 3,439 people of randomness. So the suicide rate among NFL players is also lower than it is among the average person. And I think that in general, playing sports, I mean, I think you can at least attest to, playing sports, team sports, organizational sports, or individual sports growing up, for anyone, it's going to probably lead to a healthier life in general, because there's so many aspects of society and being a person of society that relate to things that you only learn through a healthy background in sports, I think. But I mean, and it's undeniable that CTE is found in almost every pro NFL player who's been in the league for longer than a day.
Yeah,
but
that's the thing that rubs
effects,
me. Go on, keep going.
no, but the effects on it are still being determined. And
Right.
I think that also, there are players, former NFL players. We don't talk to a lot of players and former NFL players that are in their 70s, or we don't talk to a lot of they're in their 60s. I mean, we have guys, a lot of guys like, that are like famously retired from the NFL because of head concerns, like Troy Aikman and Steve Young, seem okay, and they're out there on
Sure.
TV all the time. And Chris Collinsworth, he played in the NBA, NFL a long time. He's now in his, I assume he's approaching 70. He seems okay. Like, we see the guys like Jim McMahon, the former Bears quarterback who can barely speak, and we think like, man, that's what happens. But maybe that's just what happened to Jim McMahon. There are maybe some more things to be looked at here. And I'm not saying this to convince you to go back and support the NFL or anything like that. But I do think that it's a more wide open conversation, maybe, than the ones that we're currently having about CTE and the dangers of the NFL.
Right. I get what you're saying. I guess just my concern is that it just feels like CTE is just so rampant. I mean, that there was certainly that study where, what was it, 99% of brains of former NFL players had CTE. So, but what you're saying is the connection from CTE, which is almost a universal experience for anyone who's played in the NFL for any appreciable amount of time, may not particularly correlate with later behavioral and emotional problems and intellectual problems. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's possible. The part of the thing is, it's just such a small group of people who have ever played in the NFL. It's a fraction of a fraction. But I think if you maybe broaden it to people who played college football, people who played youth football, it seems like something where there's also the perspective of just thinking of it at a very basic level of, does getting hit in the head a bunch, like, is that good for you as a person? Like, I have a hard time thinking that that's like a thing that's maybe just okay for your body to endure, just years and years of like low grade head trauma, and it's with some particularly impactful head trauma. So like, I don't know. I'm not an expert in the subject, but I will say, as just someone who watched the game, it lessened my enjoyment of it not knowing and suspecting that this had something to do with all these players having tough post careers, that I wasn't able to watch the game and appreciate it anymore. And I think that it's probably a thing, like an issue that the league maybe needs to think about from a marketing perspective. I think they just sort of need to try and figure that out, because I think that the viewership is going to atrophy. That's going to be one of the reasons why people are going to go to games less and watch games on TV less and play fantasy football less, is because there's just this perception that the game, justified or not, but there's this perception that the game seems to be too dangerous for people to play.
It's interesting that we live in an era now where most of these leagues have been going on for 100-ish years. Baseball can trace its back to the 1800s, mid 1800s to, really picking up with the World Series in the early 1900s. The NFL
actually probably one of the younger leagues, right? Of the big four, maybe one of the younger pro leagues. If you think about the NFC AFC merger as the beginning of the
for sure,
NFL AFL merger, as the beginning of the,
and the NBA, dating back to similar era, but at the same time, it's not a long period of time relatively.
Right.
So it's like we could see, and like things like the NHL, even calling the NHL the Big Four and which I agree that we call it the Big Four. It seems a huge stretch because I mean, ESPN cut anyone that was covering hockey. It's like nobody in this country, at least, cares that much about hockey.
No, that's for sure.
To think about, well, will there come a time when the NFL, or in my opinion, I think baseball in some ways is in much bigger trouble than the NFL in terms of the prosperity of their sport, giving baseball players $300+ million when, I don't know, like the World Series numbers don't hit that well on the ratings. And I mean, I'm sure that they're
But the
making their
local
money,
TV
otherwise they wouldn't
revenue is
be doing
just
it.
it's just so big, right? Like they
Yeah.
just all have insane local TV deals for whatever reason.
Yeah. And yeah, so it and I just don't think like I don't know whatever kids choose to play. It does seem to me I don't know like could you see yourself in your lifetime one of these let's say major three sports
Uh-huh.
even like going away or like hitting those low hockey or soccer numbers? Could you? I wonder too maybe that in 15 years maybe the MLS will be thriving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good observation. I mean, these things do go in waves. To be the MLB was number one for a long time,
Yeah.
and America's pastime, and then it was kind of it, it was the 80s and 90s where I feel like the NFL ascended and supplanted it. The NBA was like a pretty fringe league. I feel like up until the 70s, right? Until the late 70s and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird joined the league in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and start to transform it. So I mean, yeah, I could definitely see that happening. But also the other thing is, I don't think it ever really goes away because people still follow horse racing. People
Yeah.
still follow as corrupt and as unwatchable as some of it is. People still follow boxing.
Yeah.
I think it could maybe recede into a regional league or a less watched league. One where it's maybe like a lower profile second tier league, but I can't imagine the NFL ever going away. It's just too much of a juggernaut, and I think it'll probably be at its current status for another decade or so at least. But I think the thing to maybe be conscious of, and I think this is maybe something that a lot of sports fans are not going to have a good reaction to, is the ascendancy of esports in the next few
Yeah.
generations. Because I really feel like that's the thing where I think just in the way that a lot of I'm thinking younger than millennials, the generation younger than millennials, like don't watch TV at all. They
Yeah.
watch YouTube and that's how they consume content. And to them, like it's the idea of watching a movie for fun is the idea of like is equivalent to reading a novel for fun. It's just not something that it's something that a few people do, but it's not something that the great number of people necessarily do. Uh, and I think that generation probably has some different tastes in terms of what they follow, and maybe something like watching pro Counter Strike or pro League of Legends is going to ultimately be bigger than than some of these sports that we kind of consider to be the elite athletic leagues of our era.
I have several segments, usually things that we go through on the show that are definitely outside of sports purview. So you hit some of those, and I think this one is something that'll definitely hit close home to you, because I talk to people about where they grow up, and then I'm a food guy, so I like to know where the best places to eat in those places are, and hopefully our listeners, if they ever go to these cities, they can figure out and pilgrimage to the same locations.
Right.
I myself lived in Long Beach on Atlantic Boulevard for 2 years. I loved Long Beach. I loved going down to Belmont Shores, hitting
Yeah.
up Shannon's and having a good time. Where were your favorite places to eat in Lakewood, California, or thereabouts?
Well, okay, so this is part of the interest for part of the interest in this podcast growing up, my podcast, the Doughboys, about chain restaurants, is that we're not a family that would go to the local eateries. We're a family that
Mm-hmm.
rarely ate out, and when we ate out, we were going to a Denny's or we were getting Domino's pizza. Actually, not we were a Pizza Hut family, but we were getting something from a chain. So it was later in life that I kind of discovered some of these local Long Beach favorites, things that I just honestly never went to as a child with my family and would go as an adult on my own, or with my wife, who's also from the Long Beach area. But a big one for me is bacon broil. And
Wow.
just a great breakfast and lunch eatery, just like fantastic baked goods. I think it's Younger Ward's bacon broil. It has like a big crazy name as part of its title, but people just colloquially refer to it as bacon broil. But that place is fantastic, and that's just like a real crowd pleaser. Great service, great value for what you get. I also really like there's this spot called the Crooked Duck on PCH, which is kind of a gastropub, and but it's like very homey. It's like not like it's sometimes those gastropubs are like a little too sleek and too cool for school, and this one is like very it's kind of like a merge between that between it's kind of like a gastropub menu with a with a like kind of like a just like a neighborhood bar feel, and I really like that. The other there's one if you go down by the shore, but the Schooner later.
Yeah.
I've actually Guy Fieri actually hit it up on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, and I was like, hey, Schooner later! Like I was so excited. That used to be a place that it's like a place that the people would like ride their bikes to, and just have like a huge heavy breakfast. But that place is a lot of fun as well. I'm trying to think of I'm sure I'm forgetting some places, but those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah, I remember when I first moved to Los Angeles in 2009. I lived in Culver City, and it was in watching Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives that I found out I had moved right next to, like, literally a 5-minute walk from a place on that show called Gloria's Mexican Cafe in Culver City.
Okay, right.
And we went there, and me and my roommate, and it immediately became my favorite restaurant. I mean, he Guy knows how to pick them sometimes.
Yeah. I'm a Guy defender because I think it's like kind of great that he raises the profile of these local businesses.
Sure.
And,
longtime fans of me will know that I've been a big fan of Guy Fieri, and I interviewed him for Rolling Stone in 2014 or 15.
Wow.
One of my career highlights. Whenever someone tries to ask me, or whenever someone asks me, like, oh, who have you interviewed and what's it like? Guy Fieri is the first name that always comes to mind.
That's great.
He invited me out for food. I never managed to hit that up. I'll have to one of these days. I just reminded myself. I got him.
Go on.
No. I just got to meet him someday.
Have you been to any of his restaurants?
I've never been to a Guy Fieri restaurant.
We recently went for the podcast, we went to Guy's American Kitchen in Times Square, and I really wanted to like it, but it was honestly like a little muted. It was not quite. I expected this like, oh, there's gonna be some over the top Guy Fieri food, and it almost felt like they tried to just sort of like, it was a little stuffy, like they tried to class it up or restrain it a little bit too much, and I was just like, man, give me some fucking nachos served in a literal garbage can. Like, give me something that's like, give me just a bucket of chili, like a straight up bucket with a handle of chili. I'd like, give me something that feels like Guy Fieri, and I just wasn't getting that.
Yeah, I think if you go there, you want the experience of eating like Guy does. It should almost be I think every table should be like a booth that looks like a kitchen, and you have to like pull it out of, and you have to like be sneaking bites of the food that you ordered almost, and saying that it's off the chains.
Yeah.
I had something there in my head, and then it went away. But anyway, Guy Fieri, also one of the most notable NFL fans. He's a huge Raiders fan.
Right.
He's good friends with Marcel Reese, who is a Seahawk. He may be a Seahawks fan right now, for all I know.
He's a. I mean, I know he's a big Warriors fan. I know he's more known for his NFL fandom, but I've seen him at some Warriors games as well.
Guy Fieri, he's just a regular dude that's got an interesting job. So is there any if people come down to LA, do you think that there are any false flags for places to eat, places that sound like they're basically just tourist traps and to avoid?
We're suddenly in Alex Jones territory. Talking false flags. That's a different kind of podcast than I expected.
False flags, fast food.
Yeah. But you're saying traps, like places to avoid in LA?
Yeah, for anything that you think is like it's not that good. Obviously, I know you would tell people if they haven't been to In-N-Out to definitely go to In-N-Out.
In-N-Out is great. I would say probably maybe that people have heard of Umami Burger. I would say, that's a place you can kind of steer away from. I think the quality has kind of gone downhill, unfortunately. They do have the Impossible Burger, which is a very good burger. Yeah. But it's like the gimmick of it is that it's meatless. Like it's like, and you eat it and you're like, oh, it's impossible that this has the texture and flavor and juiciness of meat, and it's meatless. And that in and of itself is like the one thing that I think is worth getting there. But their menu in general, I feel like, has just gotten so cluttered, and it's just not as it's just not as fun of a place anymore. And I feel like the food quality has just kind of gone downhill. So that's one I would say maybe you could take a pass on. Oh, also Pink's Hot Dogs. I feel like everyone who goes to Pink's Hot Dogs is like, it's like, oh, it's this big line, it's this big LA thing, and then you actually go there and like what do I do this for? Like this is a hot dog and it's not even that good. So yeah, I think that's one where it's maybe not worth the wait unless you really want the experience of just being there.
So I'm a food fan, a sports fan, and a movie fan. So I also like to ask people about when I talk to people, if they're, I think it's something that's interesting too. If someone talks to me and they're from Minnesota or Minneapolis, I want to know what their favorite movies are that are set in Minneapolis. Right. A lot of times we don't talk about that. Long Beach, even though, okay, so like if I go to filmlongbeach.com, it says in the early 90s, the city of Long Beach started the office of blah, blah, blah. Currently, the city issues over 800 film permits a year with more than 1,000 production days, including Iron Man, Click, Pirates of the Caribbean, Lost Yard, blah, blah, blah. But I'm having a harder time finding movies set in Long Beach. Do you have any movies that stand out to you that were like, that's a Long Beach movie?
Well, here's the thing. I do remember there was a time when they started filming more in Long Beach. And I don't know if it was they made it more just amenable to filming, or they just realized, oh, hey, this is a place that kind of like we can get some different looks from what's in LA. And they started doing that, I feel like, more in the 90s, because Last Action Hero was the first one where I remember it's like, oh, they make a big point of filming in some Long Beach locations. I think they actually have the Long Beach tar pits, which are invented in in Last Action Hero, and that's a thing where it's just like, oh, hey, that's a little shout out, and you can kind of see some places where it was filmed in Long Beach areas. But there were two times when I was in high school, there were two movies that were shot at my high school. Was it three? I think there were actually three movies that were shot at my high school while I was there. One was The Craft, if you remember that. That Teen Witches movie, and then there was The Other Sister, which was oh wait, was it The Other Sister? Yeah, it was The Other Sister, the one where it was kind of a weird movie that maybe hasn't aged well, the Gary Marshall movie about like a love affair between like a couple of mentally challenged people.
Yeah, Juliette Lewis and Giovanni Ribisi.
Yeah, it's just like a really weird movie. And then Corinna Corinna, which was a Ray Liotta, Whoopi Goldberg romance, was filmed partially at Hughes Middle School, where I went to school. And then the other thing that was at my high school, Long Beach Polytechnic High School, go Jackrabbits, was a movie I was actually an extra in, The Insider, the Russell Crowe movie that kind of took down the smoking industry, took down the big tobacco. And so that was like that was a thing where I was like on set. I just worked on it a day, but I was like a kid in a hunting vest, running to class in the background in a scene where Russell Crowe has a phone conversation with Al Pacino. And so like it was just like I'd seen celebrities before just kind of being in the SoCal area, but that was like the first. It was just like, oh wow, there's Al Pacino right there. There's Russell Crowe right there. So that's a movie I always have a pretty specific Long Beach connection to.
There's like 5 movies that MapQuest lists as far as filming famous scenes in Long Beach, and I don't know if you'll know these or not. Maybe it'll be a revelation. Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
The physical house is still in existence, as well as nearby chase scenes filmed in the surrounding neighborhood. So I guess the very same house was also used in Donnie Darko and American Pie.
Hey, how about that?
It's a good house.
Yeah.
Many of the freeway scenes in Speed.
Okay, I can see that.
As well as the famous van driving off of a bridge scene in Inception was on the Commodore Schuyler F. Helms drawbridge.
Whoa, how about that? Little Commodore Schuyler shout out.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that. I know that bridge very well. And then how about Shoreline Village makes an appearance in Anchorman for the fight scene?
Hey, hell yeah. Hey man, these are good ones. There's a lot of Long Beach on cinema.
Yeah,
they should make one of those. Yeah, they should make one of those video. Like, what was that LA on film thing they made where they were just like connecting the physical locations to the scenes in movies? Someone should do a Long Beach edition of that. There's more than enough.
Hell yeah! And the last one I'll mention, one of my favorite, most underrated comedies, Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny.
Oh wow, okay.
Were you a fan of Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny?
Here's the thing. I've never seen the movie. I think
Interesting.
Tenacious D is and Jack Black and Kyle Gass are very funny, but the feature film I've never actually seen.
I would encourage you, if you got the time, to sit down and give it a watch. I think that when it came out, I remember renting it at Blockbuster without
Right.
any expectations that the Tenacious D could make a good movie. No,
Yeah.
nothing against them. It's just out of the realm of what I had expected from Tenacious D. It's great. I love that movie.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing but time these days. I'm recording a podcast about a sport I don't watch at 10 a.m. on a weekday, so I'm unemployed. I'll watch the Tenacious D movie for sure.
Fair enough.
Hey,
Nick Wiger,
oh, real quick, let me because I was racking my brain for other Long Beach wrecks. I want to make sure
yes,
I
of
get these in
course.
there. Beachwood Barbecue, a lot of fun, good family spot. Lot of you can get yourself a nice cold beer, a nice brew dog there.
Yeah.
There's a great, really nice steakhouse that's like been an anniversary spot for me and my wife that I forgot about, Kianina, and they just have fantastic service and just really great food in particular, especially if you're something of a carnivore. And then a local chain. This was actually one I did go to growing up, but Supermex is kind of this hyper local
Uh-huh.
Long Beach chain that just has like really good Mexican food. They have it's mostly to go, but it's fantastic. And of course, Roscoe's House of Chicken and
Oh man.
Waffles. It's in LA, but the original is in Long Beach. And if you've never gone, I mean, whether you're in Long Beach or whether you're up here in LA proper, I mean, that's an experience you got to have.
That's where I lived. I lived like across the street from that Roscoe's in Long Beach. And
Oh man,
that was my first Roscoe's experience. And it really
right?
is, you come out. No, that wasn't. I'm sorry. The first one was in South Central.
Hmm.
But the going there, it really did come out there. I came out thinking, the best waffles I've ever had. And
Yeah,
obviously, the fried chicken is very good. And together, it's amazing.
yeah. It doesn't make any sense, but then it makes perfect sense.
Do you have an affinity for Snoop Dogg and other LBC representatives?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Snook is Snoop. I like him. I like him, and they just called him Snook. Yeah, that's my level of fandom. No, I Snoop Dogg is a. I feel like he's the ultimate Long Beach celebrity. He's just like
Yeah.
he's always shouting out the town. He did so much to raise its profile.
Hmm.
And I think he kind of got the idea of the LBC into the collective consciousness. Um, and so, yeah, I definitely have a soft spot for the Long Beach celebs, even Sublime, which I know some people kind of
Hmm.
like, uh, or maybe it's maybe something that's popular to have as a punching bag. But man, I kind
Oh
of I
man.
kind of like Sublime, and I kind of like that their constant shout outs to Long Beach. There's something I don't know, there's something I think that just as someone who's from that area that you kind of appreciate that someone who's just kind of like acknowledging you. But yeah, Snoop is the best. I mean, I think
Yeah.
his music's great, and I think he's just like a unique personality who just has invents his own vocabulary, and people just go along with it. I think he's funny. I think he's personable. A big Snoop fan. Snook, as I like
Didn't
to call him.
didn't hold on, I'm gonna pull up the something here that I think would be interesting as well. But what's the background on Long Beach Polytech? Like what is the uh poly part, the Polytech part that goes with that?
What do you like? What does that mean?
Like Polynesian?
No, I think it's like multi. I think the poly in terms of multi technical. I think
For
that's
that,
the
every
idea.
time I drove by Longview Polytech or whatever, there was also that restaurant that was like Poly something.
Oh yeah, there's a poly burger right by there. But
So
that
I
that
thought that was like Polynesian burgers.
that used to be a Tommy's, and then I think I think Tommy's pulled out of that location, and then someone else bought it, and then they renamed it Poly Burger and just kind of retained the Tommy's menu. Tommy's is this local LA chain that's got a bunch of like just super heavy like chili cheese fries and chili cheeseburgers and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's a remnant of. Um, but yeah, and Polytechnic, Long Beach Poly was also a big NFL school. I mean, just like a lot of I'm having trouble thinking of specific
Well, I
players
got
right
that.
now.
That's what I was looking up because I
Yeah.
knew that there was a good sports background, and surely Long Beach Polytech. I've got the alumni here. One of the biggest schools for sure. We're talking about Deshaun Jackson,
Right. Deshaun Jackson's a big one.
Jarrell Casey, Mercedes Lewis, Winston Justice. I mean, it's a pretty long list. Willie McGinnis. Did you go to school with any of them for your age bracket? I'm looking at it.
I'm a little older. The player I remember who made it to the NFL, and he was, returning punts for the Cowboys for a few seasons. Didn't necessarily have a long career, but I was in Spanish class with Kenyon Rambo. I think he played at Ohio State. He's a very, very good player, but yeah, I don't know if he had much success at the NFL level.
Around the Kenyon Rambo era, from what I can tell, would also be like Marquez Anderson.
Okay.
And Manuel Wright was a few years later. Sammy Parker. But
yeah, I think it was
some good ones.
Kick off as a high-profile program. I think as I was leaving the school, so because like towards the end of I think my last season, they had a point where they were like, oh, ranked as one of the top football schools in the country.
And isn't and also former Seattle Mariner, controversially, if we're talking about baseball, Milton Bradley.
Oh yeah, Milton. Yeah, he was at. I didn't know him personally, but he was at school the same time I was there.
Oh yeah, he had line up.
Right.
Tony Gwynn. I mean, you got some historic players.
Yeah, Gwynn's got to be I think maybe the biggest. I mean, Hall of Famer. Before my time. I'm not that old.
Nick, I think we've covered most of our bases here.
Boy, do we dig into the Seahawks. really got into that Seattle football team.
Seahawks for an hour. I mean, this has been such a great episode. I hope that people enjoy it. But if they find that it wasn't up their alley, maybe hopefully bring in some people that it is their alley, and we'll have that.
Yeah, and feel free to, if you don't like this episode, feel free to say "fuck you, Wiger" on Twitter. I mean, I don't need to tell you to do that; you will just do that anyway. So, yeah.
Say "fuck you, Wiger" at Nick Wiger on Twitter.
Right.
Is there anything? I know the Doughboys podcast. Is there anything else out there that you want people to check out?
Check out Doughboys. The podcast about chain restaurants. Me and my buddy Mitch, we do end up talking a good amount of sports on there because he's a huge Boston sports fan. I'm a big NBA fan and Lakers fan in particular. But yeah, we talk chain restaurants. Just generally shoot the shit. We have different guests each week. New episodes Thursdays on feralaudio.com. Check that out.
Nick Wiger, thank you so much for joining the show. That's it for this week. Yeah, absolutely. That's it for this week on Seaside Chats. Come back next week for a new one.